If you are watching this, it's likely because something never made sense to you, not logically, but emotionally. You loved someone deeply, showed up consistently, stayed gentle, patient, understanding, and yet the person who mattered most chose distance. Not gradually, not with clarity, but suddenly, decisively, as if leaving first was the only option they had left. And what hurts the most is not just that they left, but that it felt like they had love in their hands and still walked away. This is where most people get stuck. They assume leaving means lack of love. They assume if someone truly cared, they would stay, fight, explain, soften. But avoidant love does not follow that script. Avoidant love is not loud. It is not expressive. It does not grow in closeness the way secure love does. It grows in silence, in restraint, in fear. And this is the part no one prepares you for. Sometimes the avoidant must leave you first, not because they don't love you, but because loving you feels like standing too close to a fire they were never taught how to survive. This is not a story about blame. This is not about excusing hurtful behavior. This is about understanding the invisible war that happens inside someone who learned very early that closeness equals loss and that needing someone is dangerous. At the beginning, the avoidant does not experience love the way you do. They experience curiosity mixed with caution. You feel connection and safety growing. They feel interest paired with internal alarms they cannot explain. They like you, admire you, feel drawn to you, but they also monitor themselves constantly. They watch how much they're giving. They track how attached you might be becoming. They measure how close things are getting. Because closeness, for them, is not neutral. It is a threshold. Once crossed, it activates memories stored in the nervous system, memories of being overwhelmed, criticized, controlled, or emotionally abandoned when they needed someone most. So even while they are smiling, texting, spending time with you, part of them is already preparing an exit plan. Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. Like someone who learned long ago that staying too long always leads to pain. As the connection deepens, something shifts inside them. You might feel it as distance, inconsistency, emotional pullback. You might sense that something beautiful is happening and falling apart at the same time. This is where the avoidant starts to feel the weight of love. Love begins to ask things of them, not verbally, not intentionally, but emotionally. Love asks presence. Love asks reliability. Love asks emotional availability. And these are not skills the avoidant lacks because they are cold or uncaring. They lack them because no one modeled them safely. To them, love has always been something you survive, not something you rest in. So when love starts to feel real, it also starts to feel like a trap. Not because of you, but because intimacy removes the emotional armor they spent a lifetime building. This is when the avoidant begins to believe that leaving first is the safest move. If they stay, they risk becoming too attached. If they become too attached, they risk being exposed. And exposure in their nervous system equals danger. They don't leave because you did something wrong. They leave because things were going right in a way that scared them. They leave because staying would require them to feel feelings they were trained to suppress. They leave because loving you would mean confronting parts of themselves. They learn to lock away just to survive childhood. And the tragedy is this: they don't even realize that what they are running from is not you, but the depth of their own attachment. When the avoidant leaves first, it is rarely dramatic. Often it is quiet, rationalized, framed as needing space, clarity, independence. They tell themselves a story that makes the leaving feel logical, that the timing was wrong, that something felt off, that they need to focus on themselves. These explanations are not lies. They are protective narratives. They are the mind stepping in to justify what the nervous system already decided, because the body felt overwhelmed long before the mind caught up. And once the body decides something is unsafe, logic becomes a servant to fear. This is why you can't argue an avoidant back into closeness. This is why reassurance often makes things worse. You are speaking to their conscious mind while their unconscious fear is already packing its bags. What most people don't understand is that the avoidant does not feel relief after leaving the way you imagine. There may be a short sense of control, a momentary calm, but it is shallow. Underneath it lives grief. They don't know how to process. They feel your absence in strange, delayed ways, in quiet moments, in memories that surface unexpectedly, in the safety of distance where their heart finally has room to feel without panic. This is the paradox of avoidant love. Closeness overwhelms them, but distance allows feelings to surface. Only after leaving do they begin to realize how deeply they cared. Only after the threat of intimacy is removed do they feel the ache of loss. This is why, for an avoidant, leaving first can feel like the only way to truly love you, because loving you up close demands emotional skills they don't yet have, but loving you from afar allows them to feel without being consumed by fear. It allows them to idealize, reflect, miss, and long in a way that feels safer. And this is where your pain often deepens, because you wonder why they could feel so much only after you were gone. The answer is painful, but simple. Proximity activated fear, absence activated love. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't make it up. You didn't love alone. The love was there, but it lived behind walls built long before you arrived. And until the avoidant learns that intimacy does not have to equal loss, they will keep choosing distance over connection, control over vulnerability, leaving first over risking staying. This does not make your hurt smaller, but it does make it real. And it reminds you of something important. Sometimes someone leaves not because you were too much, but because what you offered required more emotional courage than they had learned how to access yet. What happens next is the part almost no one talks about because it unfolds quietly and without witnesses. After the avoidant leaves, they don't immediately feel free the way they told themselves they would. Instead, they feel oddly unsettled. The space they thought they needed begins to echo. At first, they distract themselves. They stay busy. They lean into work, routines, surface level interactions. Anything to keep the deeper emotions from rising. But emotions don't disappear just because someone walks away. They wait, and distance gives them permission to surface. This is when the avoidant starts replaying moments they didn't allow themselves to feel while they were with you, the way you looked at them without expectation, the calm you brought into their chaos, the safety they felt but didn't know how to receive. And this realization doesn't come with relief. It comes with confusion and regret, because now they are feeling everything they shut down in real time. This is also when self-justification begins to crack. The story they told themselves about why they left starts to feel thin. They remember the moments they pulled away for no clear reason, the times you reached out emotionally and they froze, the conversations they avoided because they didn't know how to explain what was happening inside them. And slowly, painfully, they start to see the pattern, not as something you caused, but as something they have carried their entire life. This realization can be terrifying, because it means the problem wasn't the relationship, it was the fear that intimacy awakened, and fear is harder to outrun than a person. At this stage, the avoidant may feel an urge to reconnect, but it is tangled with shame. Shame for leaving, shame for hurting someone they cared about, shame for not knowing how to love in the moment it mattered. So instead of reaching out honestly, they often hover internally. They think about you. They check old messages. They imagine conversations that never happen. They want connection, but only in a way that doesn't expose them to rejection or accountability. This is why silence can stretch for so long. Not because you were forgotten, but because reaching out would require vulnerability without guarantees. And guarantees are what the avoidant has always needed to feel safe. What's important to understand here is that the avoidant's love does not disappear when they leave. It becomes suspended, frozen in time, untouched by real-world interaction. This is why they can hold on to feelings for years without acting on them. Loving you from a distance feels safer than risking closeness. Again, in distance, love can exist without demands, without expectations, without the possibility of disappointing or being disappointed. It becomes an annoying experience instead of a shared one. And while this may feel like love to them, it also keeps them stuck, because real love requires presence, not just feeling. Meanwhile, you are left dealing with the aftermath in a very different way. You feel the loss immediately and fully. There is no delay, no emotional buffer. You grieve the connection, the future you imagined, the safety you felt building. You question yourself, you replay moments, wondering what you could have done differently. And this is where the misunderstanding becomes most painful. You assume if they loved you, they would come back quickly, clearly, with intention. But avoidant love does not move toward pain. It moves away from it, even when the pain is caused by absence. As time passes, the avoidant begins to idealize what was lost. Without the pressure of intimacy, the relationship becomes simpler in their mind. The conflicts fade. The fear softens. What remains is the emotional truth they couldn't hold while they were with you. This is why avoidants often realize the depth of their love only after separation, not because love grew stronger, but because fear grew quieter. And this realization can be devastating because by the time they are emotionally ready, the other person has often already done the work of healing. This is the cruel timing of avoidant love. They leave when closeness feels unbearable, and they understand when distance feels safe. But safety built on absence cannot sustain a real relationship. And somewhere deep down, they know this. They know that loving you from afar is not the same as choosing you. And that awareness creates a quiet grief they rarely speak about. They mourn not just the relationship, but the version of themselves that couldn't stay. This is also where growth either begins or avoidance deepens. Some avoidants turn inward and finally ask the hard questions. Why does closeness scare me? Why does love feel like pressure? Why do I shut down when someone gets close? This path is painful, but it's the only one that leads to real connection. Others double down on avoidance. They convince themselves that independence is all they need, that relationships are overrated, that emotions complicate things, and on the surface, they look fine, functional, put together, but emotionally, they remain untouched and alone. For you, understanding this does not mean waiting. It does not mean excusing hurt. It means releasing the belief that their leaving was a reflection of your worth. It means seeing that sometimes someone leaves first, not because you were unlovable, but because loving you required a level of emotional presence. They had not yet learned how to give, and that truth, while painful, can also be freeing. Because the real closure is this: you were not abandoned because you lacked something. You were left because what you offered was real. And real love will always challenge unhealed fear. The avoidant must leave first, because staying would have required them to face themselves. And until they are ready to do that, distance will always feel safer than devotion. There comes a moment, often long after the silence has settled, when the avoidant can no longer fully outrun what they feel. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It shows up quietly, disguised as restlessness, a sense that something unfinished is living inside them. They may wake up thinking about you for no clear reason. They may hear a song, pass a familiar place, or feel a sudden wave of emotion that doesn't match their present life. This is when the heart begins to speak louder than fear. And for the first time, they start to understand that leaving didn't erase the connection. It only delayed the reckoning. What they feel now is not panic, it's grief. And grief is harder to dismiss because it doesn't demand escape, it demands acknowledgement. This is where the avoidant begins to feel the weight of what they lost, not as an abstract idea, but as an emotional truth. They remember how safe they felt before fear took over, how natural it felt to be seen without performance, how rare it was to be accepted without pressure. And this realization hurts because it exposes the cost of their coping strategy. Avoidance once kept them safe. Now it keeps them alone. And that awareness creates a quiet inner conflict. A part of them longs to return, to repair, to try again differently. Another part warns them that doing so would reopen wounds they barely survived closing. This internal tug of war can last months or years because both parts believe they are protecting the self. During this stage, the avoidant may start to question their identity. They've always seen themselves as independent, self-sufficient, emotionally contained, but now they are forced to confront a truth they've avoided. Independence was never freedom. It was protection, and protection has a price. The price is intimacy. The price is shared emotional space. The price is staying when leaving feels easier. This is a devastating realization because it means the pain they feel now is not accidental. It's self-created, even if unconsciously. And that realization often brings shame, not the loud kind, but the heavy, sinking kind that makes them feel emotionally small. This is also when memories begin to rearrange themselves. Moments that once felt overwhelming now feel tender. Conversations they avoided now feel important. The way you showed up consistently without demands starts to stand out. And what hurts the most is recognizing that you were not asking for too much. You were asking for something they didn't know how to give. This is where regret takes root. Not just regret for losing you, but regret for not being able to meet love in the moment it arrived. They may finally admit to themselves that they didn't leave because the relationship was wrong. They left because it was right in a way that scared them. For some avoidants, this realization becomes a turning point. Pain forces honesty. They begin to look inward instead of outward. They recognize patterns across relationships. They see how closeness always triggered withdrawal, how love always felt safest once it was no longer accessible. And for the first time, they consider that the common denominator was not other people, but unhealed fear. This is not an easy awakening. It strips them of comforting illusions. It removes the story that they are just unlucky in love. It confronts them with the reality that they have been choosing emotional distance over emotional risk again and again. But growth is not guaranteed here. Awareness does not automatically become change. Some avoidants sit in this realization and do nothing. They feel deeply but remain frozen because change would require action, and action would require vulnerability, accountability, and the possibility of rejection. So instead, they keep the love internal. They carry you quietly. They wonder what could have been while continuing to live in emotional half measures. This is the most tragic outcome because love becomes something they feel but never live, something real but never expressed, something true but never chosen. For others, something shifts. They begin to understand that love cannot be fully experienced without risk. That safety built on avoidance is not safety at all, but isolation. They realize that staying would have been hard, but leaving created a different kind of pain that never fully fades. And slowly, they start to learn a new language, the language of emotional presence, of naming fear instead of obeying it, of staying in discomfort long enough for it to pass. This process is messy. It is slow. It often happens privately, but it is real. And it begins with the understanding that leaving first did not protect them from pain. It simply postponed it. For you, this stage may already be behind you. You may have moved on emotionally, even if part of your heart still wonders. And this is important to say clearly, their realization does not obligate you to return. Understanding someone's wounds does not require reopening your own. You were not placed in their life to teach them a lesson at your expense. You were there to love honestly, and you did that. Whether they could receive it or not is not a reflection of your depth, your patience, or your worth. Sometimes the avoidant must leave first to truly love you, but that love does not always come back to you in a form you can use. Sometimes it becomes a silent truth they carry forward, shaping how they show up for someone else someday when they are more emotionally available. And while that can feel unfair, it does not make your connection meaningless. It makes it foundational. You are not a mistake. You are a mirror, and mirrors change people, even after they walk away. The deepest truth in all of this is that love does not fail because someone leaves. Love fails when fear is allowed to lead indefinitely. The avoidant leaves first because they believe distance will save them. But what ultimately saves them, if anything does, is the willingness to turn toward what scares them instead of away from it. And whether or not they ever return, the love you offered remains real. It existed, it mattered, and it did not disappear just because someone was too afraid to stay. What rarely gets spoken about is what happens after all realizations settle, after the emotional dust clears, after both hearts have been changed in ways they never asked for. This is the phase where truth becomes unavoidable. The avoidant eventually understands something quietly devastating. Leaving did not make them stronger, it only kept them familiar. familiar, familiar with solitude, familiar with emotional distance, familiar with control. And control, while comforting, is not love. Control never builds connection. It only prevents loss by preventing depth. And once they see this clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. They begin to notice how often they pull away when things matter, how often they minimize their needs, how often they confuse calm with emptiness. And this awareness changes the way they experience every future connection, because now they know what they are capable of losing when fear leads. At this stage, the avoidant may finally accept that love requires surrender. Not surrender to another person, but surrender of the illusion that independence means never needing anyone. They start to understand that needing someone does not make them weak. It makes them human. That closeness does not erase identity. It expands it. And this realization is often accompanied by grief for the life they could have lived sooner if they had learned this earlier. They grieve the version of themselves that stayed guarded for so long. They grieve the connection they didn't know how to protect. And they grieve you, not just as a person, but as a moment in time where love was offered without conditions. Some avoidants will reach a point where they want to repair, not out of loneliness, but out of clarity. They finally understand what they did, why they did it, and what it cost. But timing matters. By the time this understanding arrives, you may no longer be standing where they left you. You may have grown, healed, rebuilt your sense of safety without them. And this is where the final lesson lands for them. Love cannot be paused and resumed at will. People are not emotional storage units. When someone chooses distance, they are also choosing the possibility of losing access forever. And that truth settles heavy in the chest because it is earned. For you, this phase brings a different kind of peace, not because everything makes sense in a way that feels fair, but because you stop internalizing their fear as your failure. You realize that love didn't scare them because it is flawed, but because it was real. You stop wondering what more you could have done because you see now that the work was never yours to do. You offered safety, consistency, and emotional presence. Those are not mistakes. Those are strengths. And the right person will not experience them as pressure, but as home. This is where your story reclaims its power. You are no longer defined by being left. You are defined by having loved deeply without abandoning yourself. And that matters because many people spend their entire lives avoiding love to avoid pain. You chose love even when it hurt, and that choice expands you. It does not diminish you. The connection you shared did not fail. It completed its purpose. It revealed truth. It exposed fear. It clarified what kind of love you are capable of giving and what kind you deserve to receive. Sometimes the avoidant must leave first to truly love you, but that love is not always meant to return as a relationship. Sometimes it returns as understanding. Sometimes it returns as closure. Sometimes it returns as the freedom to stop chasing someone who was never ready to stay. And sometimes the most loving thing that comes from being left is the realization that you never needed to prove your worth to someone who was afraid of intimacy. The final truth is this: love does not ask you to shrink, wait indefinitely, or tolerate emotional absence. Love asks for presence, courage, and mutual effort. If someone had to leave you in order to feel their love, that tells you everything you need to know about where they were emotionally. It does not tell you anything about your value. You were not too much. You were not too intense. You were not asking for the impossible. You were asking for something real. And real love always exposes what is. So if you are still holding space in your heart for someone who left first, let this be the release. Their journey is theirs. Your healing is yours, and the love you carry is not wasted. It will meet someone who does not need distance to understand its worth. Someone who does not confuse fear with intuition. Someone who stays when things matter. And when that happens, you will finally understand that being left was not the end of your story. It was the moment you stopped settling for half-available love and began making room for something whole.